Once a bullet enters a gel, it has other forces pushing on it and robbing the energy.
Well, I'm seeing this over 900 yards.
Yeah.
You know, kind of what's happening in 10 feet. What is up, everybody? Mark on the mic. Across from me, my good friend, Ryan Muckenhirn. And welcome back to the Vortex Nation podcast. And welcome to 300 Super WSM, answering your questions. Right?
Have we ever done this?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually good. Well, number one, okay, hold on. I'm going to get there.
Okay.
A while back, I want to set the stage here. A while back, Ryan, we did a little video/project building the ultimate long-range hunting rifle/cartridge, hence the 300 Super WSM. The video did really well. A lot of people commented on it. A lot of people had questions, right? So here we are today. We're going to do that. But it did make me think, it's so amazing how many people comment on things and have questions. I was like, oh, I should really go through. And I guess that's where we get a lot of our topics. But then we could probably do another podcast where it's just a boom, 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 answering a lot of questions at one time.
Sure.
So it's kind of two ways to get topics. One is we get an overall topic, and one we just answer a lot of things.
Yeah.
This one is a lot of things.
Yeah.
This stack of printouts has some weight to it.
Some heft, mass.
At least 212 grains.
Nice.
That was Dixie in the background. MC Ryan's dog, if you heard that.
She's okay.
Should we just get started?
Rock and roll, Mark.
Okay, Ryan. This is the first one. This is more of a comment. Oh, I'll also say this. It's answering your questions, but then there's also comments, some of which are just complimentary towards us, a couple of them. So I thought I'd include those. That always feels nice. And some of them I thought were funny. So I included those as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Finally, a channel that acknowledges clear ballistics gel is not gelatin. It is not water-based like gelatin and muscle tissue is, and therefore projectiles designed specifically to open up when striking water-based tissue will often not perform well in them.
Who tossed that one out there?
Matt, Comchalk, 2957.
My man.
Yeah. That was definitely something we knew but discovered in a very real way on this project.
I like how you said learned the hard way different. Discovered in a very real way. We learned the hard way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That set us back months.
Mentally, really.
Yeah.
Just it was that was a mental setback. We were not getting expansion on the clear permagel at between 800 and 900 yards.
845.
I think it was 875.
That could have been somewhere between 8 and
somewhere between 8 and 9, like I said, Ryan. But then once we switched to the ordnance gel, perfect expansion.
945 yards. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I'm just gonna get here now because this was timeout. I'm gonna save it. Okay. CCHC1DR. That's awesome. What was your case overall length, velocity, and powder? I know we don't really talk about powders here. Maybe you can talk about the type of powder that you used.
Yep. So cartridge overall length is measured from tip to case head. Where generally, if I'm loading cartridges, I'm actually measuring from the ogive. You could do that with this one, but remember the LRX Bore Rider is a sub 30 caliber projectile forward of we'll call it the driving band.
Yeah.
I guess. So you're not, that datum is not necessarily the same as it would be if you're using an ogive comparator. But cartridge overall length as measured from tip to cartridge head is 3.465. Powder charge, I won't disclose. I will say it is published data. I am under what Barnes puts in the load manual, and I was using H4831 shortcut. Muzzle velocity, the highest I got this to was 2850 with a single-digit SD. Curiously, at the starting loads where I started and where I topped out, and by topped out I mean I found pressure, there was like a 25 foot per second difference. And it was a significant delta in powder. So I actually said, well, what's the point? 25 feet per second is peanuts, and I just back down to what my starting load was, which was a pretty modest charge of 4831 shortcut. And then we ended up with like a 2830 average. Again, single digit SDs. What was really cool is over the course of this project, most of the time I was loading in blocks of 30 for cartridges, and I fired about 225 of these projectiles. And we'll just say 210 of them were in these blocks of 30. And every single time I landed back on that load, so we'll just call it like whatever, 9 distinct groups. They all ended up about in that pocket. It was perfect.
Yeah.
The data never changed. It was quite sweet.
Big Tuna 8504 says, perfect shooting form by both and really phenomenal accuracy. I love seeing the guys show they aren't just commentators, they are the real deal. Boy, compliments don't get better than that. I received one the other day that was the opposite of that, Ryan.
That happens sometimes, Mark.
Yeah.
Remember, it's important not to focus on the negative.
You'll get that on the internet.
Yeah.
I'm gonna only read comments from Big Tuna from here forward.
Big Tuna, I want you to know, Boardman and you are now kindred spirits. Tuna.
Okay. I think we need to see some long-range targets because I can tell you right now, the majority of customers I build long-range hunting rifles for are going to be using burger bullets for the long-range accuracy. I can also tell from experience, Barnes and Nosler bullets are not on the list of LR bullets I would ever be using.
It's an interesting statement, and I'm not going to necessarily argue with the lady or gentleman who put that out there. Although a curious thing, specifically with Barnes, one thing that I've always enjoyed with them is their consistency in weight. And so being that they're a monolithic and they're made out of one material, save for the Delrin tip, so we'll call that two. Generally speaking, within a given lot or batch, they end up being spectacularly consistent. Once you find the accuracy node with them, it has, again, been my experience, and you may tell I have a bias, they shoot exceedingly well. Now, in context of long range, I would agree with you in that, like, typically speaking, a burger, whether it's an EOL, a VLD, whatever, a hybrid, they're going to be a stellar long-range solution because they have bonkers high BCs. They have a lot of attention to detail put on their, their jacket concentricity, their meat-plat concentricity. They're good bullets, right? There's a reason that they have a lot of world records under their belt because of, what they're for. They're a long-range shooting bullet. I'll debate you on whether or not they're a great hunting bullet, right? And I'm not talking about in this hyper-specific context of like 600 yards and out, but like across the course. If I have a critter at 240 yards or if I've got a critter at 840 yards, we start introducing some angles. We start introducing some heavy tissue and bone. I know which bullet will maintain its integrity, and I know which bullet will likely suffer a core jacket separation. Not that that's necessarily bad. Sometimes it's actually advantageous. You punch one in the thoracic and you have this very dramatic, disruption of the projectile. Nothing will kill quite like that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Mark, you killed a moose with a burger.
So, yeah, I mean, that's where I was going to go. I think the bullets he mentions here are phenomenal long-range solutions, and there's no question that they've killed stuff at close distances as well. The moose that you're talking about, that was one of my longer shots on game ever, 733. Perfect conditions, not a breath of wind in the air. I held straight up. That bullet hit straight up right in the pocket. Moose ran 20 yards, tipped over. Found just a little bit of the bullet on the inside of the hide. I don't even know if I still have it, if we could weigh it right now. But it was almost like a wafer.
Yeah, it was
of the front, whatever. The lungs were complete mush.
Goo.
Just absolute goo. And like I said, he went 20 yards, tipped over. Like, as good of a result as you could expect.
Yeah.
I think what we were looking for in this instance is a bullet that was going to perform pretty much the same at long and short range.
Correct.
And just to have that consistency, like you said, no matter what the shot angle, long range, short range,
And
I'm always hoping for a short range shot, but I like to prepare for a longer shot.
And to like give the Burger projectile design credit where credit is due. It is the optimal solution for long distance shooting in 99% of scenarios. This being somewhat of a rare exception, albeit an odd and unique one, in that there's some serious considerations that you need to make to your rifle to make these work. This has a BC of 0.705 as measured on G1, which is a weird G1. It's like a 350 G7. It has a phenomenally low window of function on its muzzle velocity, and that's to get to caliber and half diameter. So full deployment, right? And then what it brings to the table is very special and unique. I would not think it's fair to Burger to compare Burger to Barnes, nor would I think it is fair to Barnes to compare them to Burger.
No.
Because they do two very, very distinctly different things. This one ends up playing, I think, into the Burger territory very well, and then covers down where maybe the Burger is not the optimal choice. But it's a good statement.
Yeah, I mean, I think
this one might open your eyes.
It's an interesting talking point for sure. And I've got some comments down the road that are going to play into the velocity threshold for expansion with this one.
Sure.
I wish you'd have cycled a few from the mag. Loved everything else. Awesome video. That's from Mike Buttrey's 5147.
Well, Mike, let's get right to that. So I don't think we mentioned it, but Mark and I had less than a business week to assemble all the components to get this rifle done. And then we had a day to get it built. And then that night, the following day, because it was a Friday. It wasn't. It was a Wednesday. The following Saturday, I did all the load work up on it. So we did all of this in a time period of about 8 or 9 days.
Pretty compressed window.
So if you've ever ordered custom components for a build, usually these things take a lot of time. A few places we got extremely fortunate. 24-inch 1 1/8 twist 30 caliber barrels, not in super high demand. So when they're on the shelf, that's a happy coincidence.
I'm pretty sure this one came out of a private collection at the Proof Research
facility.
It really?
Yeah. Okay. The stock, initially we had wanted same manners, but with an M5 cut, and that was not available. So what we ended up with was a Manners that had a cut for an AICS pattern magazine that kind of works. I modified the magazine to feed a single round. I could have further modified the magazine by popping out the ribs inside of the mag or eliminating them completely. It simply came down to time. It was a suboptimal magazine selection just due to circumstance. What we would actually do differently is run the Hunter, like the M5 Hunter bottom metal and magazines from Mac Brothers or Hawkins Precision, which feed flawlessly.
It is likely down the road. We haven't done it yet, but this rifle will see an update. This is a great stock. It just wasn't for this project.
This was the linchpin. Yeah. And unfortunately, we had the time constraint, so we did it. Modified the magazine. If I put one in the magazine, it feeds great. The feed rail geometry only had to be modified a little bit. And if you've ever worked with AICS pattern magazines or AI pattern magazines, that's not uncommon. They have to do a little tweaking. That part works great. It's the rail, the indentations, those ribs in the magazine that end up actually interfering with the rest of the mag. My personal build is going to run the Hawkins / Mac Brothers DBM system that feeds really good.
Personal build?
Yeah.
That's right. You're making one of these now.
The first 3 rounds through the gun, I decided I'm making one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just got back from the Conservation Expo in Utah, and I was in I was getting a little breakfast.
Yep.
I'm actually generally I don't eat any breakfast, but those are long days.
Yeah.
And So I was getting a banana, a yogurt, and maybe that's all I had. Anyway, gentleman sat down. I was kind of at like the public bar table, if you will. And he said he was booking a grizzly and a caribou and a moose hunt for he and his buddy, kind of like a combo deal. We're having a lovely chat, and he says, well, you cost me $5,000.
Whoops.
And I was assuming, actually, that he'd bought maybe some, a spotting scope and a bino at the show or something of that nature. And he said, I built one of them Super WSMs. He said it's his new favorite rifle.
They're pretty cool. Yeah.
So anyway, some corroborative evidence there that, Ryan, that it's going to be a great option. Tony DeVeach, 7937. You fellas have cool jobs with a Z.
Yeah, it is true.
Is correct.
Yep.
Yeah, correct, Tony. Ross White, I know now what I must do. Thank you.
Ross, you're going to love it. You're going to like the way you look.
You're going to like the way you look.
I guarantee it.
Eric Curbin, 1489. Would it be as simple as buying a Tikka 300 WSM and changing the bolt stop and magazine? I think there are even some 1 8 twist barrels on some. This feels too simple. What am I missing?
You are correct. It does feel too simple. So this was the initial plan. However, the Tikka cartridge the action allowance on the Tikka is just slightly too prohibitive to allow this to work. Now, what you can do on your Tikka, though, and this is not something I would overlook necessarily, you can get a Hell's Canyon Armory magazine that allows you a significant jump in cartridge overall length allowance for the Tikka action. And then you can throat your rifle a little bit long, and you can run, say, a 200 grain Berger, a 215 Berger, a 208 grain Barnes LRX, which is a very similar bullet, has very, very similar properties, similar function windows, things like this. Requires a little bit more amendment. You're getting into, again, a custom throated barrel. And we can kind of tie back to why this is special in that it's not a custom throated chamber. This is actually a SAMI 300 WSM chamber. In fact, on the barrel break-in, some of the first loads that I shot out of here, which all landed well under sub-MOA, were regular 300 WSM, 165, 168, 180 grain stuff. Factory WSM chamber, so SAMI WSM chamber. But you can't do this necessarily on a Tikka. If you had a Remington 700 long action, it would be a wonderful donor action. You could do that there. You could do it on a Savage. You could do it on, you probably do it on a Winchester long action, but not a Tikka, unfortunately. Because the first thing that crossed my mind is, yes, thank God I have an extra Tikka at home. I can get a different bolt for it. I'm done with this project in like 15 minutes. Like, life is great. It didn't work out that slick, unfortunately, but
it's I can see the line of thinking he had, because we both had that same exact line of thinking. Like you said, like, can it be this good? And it's close to being that good. And I'm jumping ahead to a comment from Tom D 3458. He says, so this is just a 300 WSM and a long action shooting the longer shooting the longer Barnes bullets, ?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So put that back in the end. I'm going to check that one off my list here. Mike Jones -VB1ME. I think I'll just work on getting closer than a mile away from the animal.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
In general. Yep. We support that statement 110%. This is more of a proof of concept to say, like, what is the capability of this cartridge? Especially stacked next to cartridges like, we'll just pick on 300 PRC, which is currently kind of the king of the 30s.
Sure. And not without significant merit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. So this isn't for everybody. I generally go out of my way to try to get closer to critters if I can help it. I really have no interest or desire to shoot something from a super long distance. These things happen, though. I've hunted with Mark we probably started hunting together maybe 8 years ago. I've known you for 10. We have bounced ideas. We've talked about scenarios innumerable times. You've taken some game at long distances. I will say, knowing Mark very well, that is not what he sets out to do, because he hunts a lot of crazy places on high adventure hunts. These things happen, and it can be the difference of that is your opportunity on the hunt, and your thousands of dollars and dozens of hours of time away from family and work will either result in you bringing meat home or not. If you have the tool to do it and you are confident with it and well practiced in it, that's what they're there for.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all the keys right there. To me, it's just another tool in your toolbox. I never set out to intentionally take a longer shot. But if like you said, if I have the tools and I've practiced and I have the conditions, right? The right wind conditions, which for me on an extremely long shot is basically no wind. Yeah. Not no wind, but negligible. Yeah. And I'm confident, then I'll send it. If I'm not, I won't.
It's like on that bear hunt that you shot that bear from quite a poke. Not quite a half mile.
It's pretty crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But, and I'm going to skip ahead. I can't remember which comment it is or who made the comment, but they're like, oh, shooting at, these extended ranges, 900 yards, which that bear was not 900. It was 780. They're like, that's not hunting, you're not using your hunting skills. Well, I can tell you that I'd been on a backpack hunt for 5 days, hunting my absolute tail off, working my tail off with two of my really good friends. And we'd had a heck of a hunt. And that was the morning of the last day. And we were going to be packing out that afternoon, evening. But I had the tools and the practice and the conditions that when we got that opportunity, I was confident I could take it. Now, I'll say this earlier, or it was actually the day before, on a different bear that came out and just didn't stick around long enough. In fact, he was at 6-something, right? So much closer. Conditions and the terrain were such that I was going to shoot off shooting sticks. So again, now I'm decreasing at least the distance that I'm comfortable taking a longer shot at. And so instead of attempting that shot, I held off and the bear disappeared on us, right? So everything is so situational, contextual, personal. It's kind of a personal decision, I guess. Yeah. Chuck Chorus 1776, I like that. Velocity Energy BC.
Velocity, we'll just call it 2830 average. Mm-hmm. Energy, I don't know. And BC is 0.705 G1 or about a 0.350 G7.
Yeah. Energy, it's obviously...
It's significant. Well, I can look it up because I've got geoballistics.
I was going to say, if you had access to your geoballistics.
Geoballistics. Ballistics made easy.
We talked about the velocity threshold for expansion. I think that's one thing that, at least to me, is a little bit unique on this Barnes bullet, is that it will expand down to, what I consider, fairly low velocities.
Oh, yeah. Energy is about 37.75 at the muzzle.
That's a lot.
That's some horsepowers.
Okay, here's the one I was going to get to from Chuck. Maybe I don't know who this is from. You had me until you pulled up in a Tacoma.
That's fine.
I told you we should have taken the Tundra.
No, that's okay. That's fine.
I do the curating here, so then I pick the ones that I. TO59. But how do they group?
Well, let me tell you. As I said earlier in this production, round number 4, I was positive that this is something I need to have. Round number 1. So I kind of do the same thing on every rifle barrel that I work with. I try to clean them out as best I can and make sure I get all the, potential chips from the, chambering, threading process, and then cutting fluid out of the bore. So I give them a 99% isopropyl swab and brushing, get them nice and dry. And then I try to burn down some just kind of fodder ammo, get them kind of lapped out, if you will. My experience with proof research barrels has been they're all really, really good from a surface finish standpoint, and they really don't require a lot of attention. Sometimes they suck in as few as like 5 rounds, and you start to see, I'd call it almost a stable part. I still think they're going to speed up after, 100 or so, 200 rounds. But I just ripped down the barrel, about 20 rounds of random crud. And actually it was, what was it? Was it just 180 grain soft point, 300 wisdoms, just like
Something like that.
some Winchester gray box or something. Anyhow, so got that done, let the gun cool, grab the loads. Round number 1 was at a different POI than where I was zeroed, made an adjustment to targets. Rounds 2, 3, 4 landed into about a 0.3. And I thought, oh boy. So let the gun cool again. And then I put up a 5-round group that would have gone about 0.45. So a couple challenges with the rifle. I can say this, it's very nose heavy, very light in the back end, and it kind of has a fishtail. So it's a different stock design than I typically like to drive. Nonetheless, that's no excuse. I should know how to do it. But once I gained control of the rifle, anything I pointed at, I could just absolutely smack. The gun is routinely produced, half MOA or better. And that's a bold statement because, we hear that a lot, like, oh, it's a half-minute gun. Not a lot of guns are consistently half-minute guns. This one seems to be fairly consistently a half-minute gun or better.
Yeah.
So it's put up some impressive groups. When it's not super windy on our outdoor range, we were shooting 25% IPSC targets at 700 and 800 yards, and we were able to keep, probably like a 3-inch group, 4-inch group at 700 or 800 on a 25% IPSC, which is a tiny target. A quarter scale IPSC target's about like this big. So you barely, I'd have to do the measurements on it, but you probably have an 8 or a 9-inch target width by about a 10 or a 12-inch target height, and being able to keep them in a 3 to 4-inch ball, from a bipod, at 800 yards it's a significant gun. It shoots exceedingly well.
I got to thinking about accuracy of that previous comment. The gentleman commenting on our bullet selection.
Yeah,
and but I have nothing against the bullets that he like.
No.
I think what he's thinking are great long range bullets. They are long range bullets. I do not dispute that. But what I do dispute, like, I guess, and this was just off my off the rack Tika, but before I made some changes, that thing really liked those 190 ABLRs, and I was shooting that gun out to 800, and it was just holding water line on the target, and it was just wind, and I'm like, I guess it also depends on your definition of long range. Like that's kind of long range to me.
Yeah.
Particularly for like a hunting scenario. But anyway,
there's 880 yards in 1/2 of a mile, so
that's a lot.
Yeah,
Mr. Macbeth. Sorry. I think it's dumb, but I would totally try it.
I agree. I kind of agree. I think it's kind of dumb too.
I was like, oh, this guy could be on the podcast with us.
I think it's kind of dumb too. But in a really interesting way, it's like, yeah, it's kind of dumb because you probably will never see a factory interpretation of this because it requires so many different things to be reconfigured with the rifle. But man, is it the perfect vehicle for that bullet? Really, it is the perfect vehicle for that bullet. And
the whole thing is a bit of a perfect storm, if you will.
I encourage you to try it. As Mark had mentioned, we were at the Western Hunting Expo, would have been 2 weeks ago per this recording. And the first day, I probably had 5 to 7 Utah residents that came up and either had already had one of these, being as their proximity to the Barnes location, and it's a small community. Guys have been talking about this for some time, or they had built one post-production and had been fielding it. And everybody had exactly the same thing to say. It is my favorite hunting rifle. And I had a gentleman come up. I can't remember your last name. I'm not going to use your first name on the podcast, but you showed me several videos that you and your grandchildren had been successful to field with these at distances out to like 956 yards, I think, on a good bull elk. And it was devastating. The paper performance, even the gel performance, does not adequately highlight the terminal package because it's wild.
And I'm pointing at the loaded cartridge here. It just looks pretty cool too.
It does, yeah. It's sharp.
LR Lapua 8035. How does a bullet travel in such an arc, hit the gel, and travel in a straight line? We got a couple of these. This is Mr. Clean 7557. It's so weird seeing the bullet travel 120 inches horizontally through the gel at 875 with nearly 16 feet of peak vertical drop. At Biggie 2259, why isn't the bullet track going down? Wait, hold on. That impact went 6 to 8 feet in the gel before it curves down. Something fishy going on here.
So I think what some of the viewers are alluding to is that perhaps we were not at 800 and change yards.
There was, I think, an even more pointed one that
they thought,
insinuated that.
They thought there was some shenanigans afoot, in which we were just off camera, firing into this block at a distance of, 80 feet. And this is a valid question, right? So,
well, it is.
Yeah.
So much so that I was kind of like, well, I was there. I know that we were firing at the whatever our stated distances were. But I also had the same question at the end of it. I'm like, yeah. So then I asked Greg at Barnes.
Yep.
And I've got his response here.
Would you like me to read it?
Please.
Okay. This is Ballistics Lab and R&D supervisor over at Barnes, good friend of ours. So effectively, Mark asked the question as posed by the customer, right? Like, how is it that over such a great distance, when we observe such an extraordinary trajectory, and like from the shooter's perspective, I watch Trace leave my FOV, re-enter my FOV, and impact the block.
It looks like an artillery round.
Correct, yeah.
You know.
A few things to consider. I think you may assume that the bullet has a very dramatic angle of attack and nose downward position at that range. That is actually not the case. A simple way to look at this is to run the trajectory and look at the drop due to gravity. I'm doing a little bit of paraphrasing here because Greg is adding some relief here. But long and short is what he's saying is if you could look at your trajectory over the course of 12 feet, we'll just say 845 yards plus 4 yards change, and then break it down per yard. So you've got a 1 yard resolution on your chart. So we have to look at that first and foremost, right? If we run the trajectory with geoballistics using our Doppler data and a muzzle velocity of 2850, it shows the bullet drop 6.2 inches over a distance of 10 yards. That's 0.62 inches per yard or 3 feet. If you use two 18-inch gel blocks, that drop would only be 0.62 inches due to gravity. Using another ballistics calculator down to 1 inch or 1 yard increments using the same MV, between 940 and 943 yards, you end up with 1.85 inches of drop over the 9 feet of travel. There's also another part here, which Greg I'm going to skip a paragraph. But once a bullet enters a gel, it has other forces pushing on it and robbing the energy. Due to the design, profile, material, mass, and sectional density, 212 LRX BR will penetrate deep, even when expanded with a large frontal area, and track fairly well straight forward. It is common and understandable to see some variation in the path once traveling the gel block, but overall they say in somewhat of a straight line. Depending on the design and the factors mentioned above, some bullets can yaw very soon when they enter the gel, and this will cause large deviations. So what Greg is alluding to here is, if we hit the surface, now all of a sudden we have gravity plus velocity and then forces imparting on the frontal portion of the bullet. We're actually going to encounter some resistance on the bottom side, and it's going to almost correct that bullet. It's going to then see force on top of it, from the left of it, from the right of it. Because these bullets are maintaining effectively as much of their structural integrity and then shape as possible because they deploy so rapidly, and we've got this concentric shape that's cutting through the gel block, they maintain track and they don't deviate too much. But remember, there's always that force on kind of all sides of this bullet, kind of keeping it stabilized, if you will. It does drop, and it's very subtle, and it's difficult to see in the video, but if you look at it, like if you start on one end of the block, and especially on the clear ballistics gelatin stuff, when it was not expanding at all, You're getting the nose cone come off, and everything was keeping that same kind of bullet shape, right? There's drop to it. It's so insignificant though. It's amazing. You would think it would be feet. You would think it would go through half a block and out the bottom of the table.
Well, and it does look so dramatic.
Yeah.
But then I guess I do, after reading Greg's explanation, take a step back and go, well, I'm seeing this over 900 yards.
Yeah.
You know, kind of what's happening in 10 feet.
Yeah. And and you're not taking that slice out of that trajectory at 10 feet and auditing it.
Right.
You're seeing this gross examination of that trajectory over distance. Yeah. That's a good question, though. I promise Mark and I were not 80 feet off the end of that thing pulling the trigger.
Hence, I would say, the table.
Yeah, correct.
That tells part of the story. I can't remember if I talked about this when we did the, maybe I did, but I think I did, but I'm still bummed it didn't make the video. When you said, hold the edge of the table, and then I hit the edge of the table.
Yeah.
I actually felt pretty good about that shot. Mason Rally 45-85. So the whole weapon was purpose-built around a new projectile, but how would you know if the rifle barrel would like those particular rounds? We all know to try several loads when initial testing to see what each rifle prefers, but not here. You're the pros. I was just curious. Which I think that might be you're the pros is a little bit extreme, at least for this side of the table, but appreciate the kind words. But great question.
That is a damn fine question, in fact. And the reality is you don't know. So having thrown together a handful of rifles over my lifetime and then having worked with a slightly larger handful more, it is kind of a crapshoot. You work under the assumptions that the other parts of the equation are correct. So we've got a good chambering job. The chamber is concentric with the bore. Good action, although any action, if set up properly, would probably suffice. Twist rate appropriate for the projectile length and mass was a big thing, right? So if we had done this with a 1-9 twist barrel, I would not have had spectacular expectations. But how do you know? You just don't until you try. With this particular bullet, you really don't have a lot of runway for cartridge overall length or C2 depth, right? So the driving band on the projectile is effectively an identical length to the case neck of the 300 WSM, plus minus a few thou, right? It's not a huge amount. And so when I was working with it, I said, okay, I'm just going to take the bullet. I measured its driving band, and then I measured the case neck length, and I said, okay, what do I get? I get plus minus about nothing. So I seated the bullet to the very extent of its depth before all of a sudden I was below the case mouth. There's a minor radius on the projectile that is visible, also measurable, and it's kind of when that driving band begins to terminate and taper down to the bore riding component of the projectile. It was at that point that I said, this is the C2 depth. My thought there was I would have a few thou leeway to go forward. Not a ton, but a few. And so if it didn't like what it saw at that particular C2 depth, I'd have a little bit of room that I could run with to see if there was any tangible change. What became I suppose, really remarkable surprise is the novelty of bore rider bullets, of which there's not enough of. There's a very small handful of them out on the market.
Well, this project to me, Ryan, left me going, well, what if we did this style of bullet with this? What if we did this style of bullet with this?
What's cool about it, and I suppose it depends on what school of thought you subscribe to, and this is a very contested statement. Cartridge overall length and jump doesn't matter. I don't know that I necessarily buy it. There's some compelling evidence that states that that's actually true, depending on a few things. I would say it doesn't seem to matter in this particular loading as much because the bullet is actually supported by the very peak of the land when it goes in. There's a minor contact, and I am talking like I'm trying to think of something infinitesimal. Static electricity contact, like that thin. That bullet does not necessarily have a spectacular opportunity to cant or yaw or pitch once it's launched from the case mouth. So it's almost perfectly centrated in the bore upon launch, and it can't go up, down, left, right, which is what some people argue, pushing your ogive forward or back with jump is useful for. You mitigate the amount of run out that bullet can have post-firing, post-departure from the case mouth, and then slamming into your lands and grooves. This bullet can't by its design. So it's like supported on the peak of the land. And ergo, the jump didn't really matter. It was just very neat. With that, I then arrived at the statement that I told Mark after the first day of working with it. It appears that this is the easiest loading I've ever done in my life. Because I literally put the powder in it, seated the bullet to the spot on the bullet, and it just worked.
Is it possible we just got a good one?
I don't know. So I always put that in the back of my mind because, like, I'm building a couple of rifles this year. All stuff that I've worked with in the past, all stuff that I've been very confident in the past from a cartridge and bullet technology standpoint. My biggest fear, though, is I think what our listeners are alluding to is, like, how do you know it's going to work? Like, I'm doing a 6-arc again. I got really lucky with my other one. I can put up some bonkers velocity. Can I even approach that with the new one? Or with the 300 Super that I'm building, can I do the same thing out of it or appreciably similar? And I think the answer is yes, just kind of based on, again, the bullet design, the cartridge layout, the chamber, how kind of predictable that is now being a SAMI chamber. And then feedback that I got from, like, probably no less than a dozen people is specifically at WHC that came out of the woodwork that had the exact same solution, like identical. And they're like, no, that thing is a demon. No fuss. We were all shooting the same powder. We all had effectively identical load data. Some guys we use Hornady brass because we have an infinite supply of it here because we use 300 WSM for recoil testing, and it's great brass. Some guys were using Lapua, which is very expensive. That's a little bit outside of my price range in Privé.
I think that's a point of order, and that was actually one of the last comments. Lapua is now making 300 WSM brass.
That's correct.
So that's pretty cool.
That says a lot to me for the cartridge's long-term viability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Would it also be safe to say, Ryan, and actually I'd be really, really curious. I kind of thought about this late in the game. I wish we would have done it because we've got, just between you and I, we've got a bunch of different types, brands of 300 WSM, loaded factory. But because it's a SAMI spec chamber, you can do what we did by using the long action, but you don't necessarily have to. So you have a safety built in that you're like, oh, let's say they didn't shoot, which I think they probably would, but you're like, oh, well, let's shove some 190 ABLRs or some 200 grain ELDXs in there. Or,
Did it.
Or some Swift Scirocco, 180 Swift Scirocco's, whatever you want to.
So concurrently,
I think that's part of the beauty of this.
So concurrently, I was also working on Mark's rifle, working up loads. We were doing some experimentation with some other projectiles, kind of discovering that even though, like, he had gone from a stock format Tikka to this, semi-custom Tikka with a different barrel, a different stock on it. One of the unfortunates of his build is he lost an unbelievable degree of accuracy with a very particular loading. Happened to be the 190 ABLRs, the factory stuff. They shot unreal out of your Tikka, unreal, and it was such a stellar bullet that it was sad to see that happen, right? And this kind of goes back into, well, how do you know? So everything about your reconfiguration, you would have said, oh, it's probably going to shoot them better because now we have this better barrel, quote, better barrel. We have this, quote, better stock. Everything is elevated in perceived quality and cost. Definitely cost, not perceived cost, but like actual cost. And unfortunately, like, a side effect was it didn't shoot the 190 ABLRs worth a hoot any longer. We did find that the 200 grain ELDX out of his gun was awesome. In fact, I remember calling you and saying, this is the load that you are going to shoot, because it was like a ragged hole. I also had a stash of marks.
I've been shooting the heck out of it.
Yeah.
You know, and with, you know, I think I tried like maybe 3 different types of stuff. And I had that one box of, and part of the reason why I was not testing that one first was I only had the one box. And I'm like, hey, try, like I had to go home that night or something. You were going to be at the range. I'm like, hey, after you do that, run a couple of these through there. And then that's when, yes, you're like, yeah, this is the one. And it, oh boy.
So what was cool though is I had all this extra ammo lying around that Mark has probably not heard this revelation until right now. I took a small sampling of each and I tried it through the old Super WSM, and the worst group was 165 GMX Super Performance, and it was still sub half MOA.
You're kidding me.
No, man.
Well, so we have done it.
Yeah.
You just didn't do it with me.
No. It was.
Did you have a 7-Up too?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I did not. So it's pretty cool how.
So at least you wouldn't do that without me.
Correct. Yeah. There are some things that are, there's like a sanctity in that, but, so yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Like, how do you know? You don't, you take for granted that your components and your assembly were correct. You do your diligence on the bench and you pray. This is every time I throw a load together. You can never take for granted that just because you're using premium components and premium procedure, that the result is premium output sometimes.
I'd say more often than not that is the case.
It can be.
You can bank on that to a large degree.
It can be. You know, in the case of your Tika 300 short mag, like I took a 175 LRX load, spun it up. It was incredible how well it shot. Incredible how well it shot. Didn't fit your magazine, was a non-starter, right?
Right.
So, you know, what do you do about that? Nothing. You
Nothing.
move on.
But we might, you know, down the road, might make some of those adjustments that you talked about earlier.
Yeah. Great question, though.
Yeah, that was awesome. Salmon Slammer 9657, the old pencil holing Barnes, LOL.
I imagine that you.
That's a watch till end.
Yeah.
You didn't watch till the end.
I'll say this. I've heard that a lot. I've killed a lot of stuff with Barnes, like a lot. Probably more than a lot of people might know. And I network with a lot of people who kill a lot of stuff with bullets of all kinds. And one of the things that Mark and I have talked about on this podcast before is like, why do we do so many cartridges and bullet tests and talks? Well, I think it's because people want to know, right? A lot of people, like, this is pertinent to what we do on a day-to-day basis. And these are questions that us as sportsmen and women don't necessarily get answered in one spot, but also, and I mean this is not a defamatory statement. In this time that we've been doing this, I've heard that everybody's bullet is either the best or the worst. And every cartridge is either the best or the worst. And what I'm saying is, like, I've heard that Barnes bullets don't expand. I've heard that Barnes bullets do expand. I know what they've done for me over the course of 40 plus cervids, not counting like coyotes because they don't count, but I know what they do. And I've observed and tested again and again and again. But I've also heard that bullets like ELDXs, of which I'm not publicly like the biggest fan of for hunting because they don't necessarily fit what I'm looking for in a projectile. Not that they're ineffective, but I've heard people say like, oh, they need like 400 yards to deploy. That is the inverse of reality.
Right.
Yeah. Like people say like, oh, if you hit something at under 100 yards, they don't have time to open up. No, that bullet opens up like that, like kaboom, open
That'd be
up.
like saying like, if you get in a car accident at 100 miles an hour, that's going to not cause damage, but at 2 miles an hour, look out.
Yeah.
That's an extreme, obviously, analogy there.
Yeah. But to your point, the old pencil holding Barnes LOL, you have to understand the function parameters of the bullet, like what it can and cannot do.
Well, and I think what this person is referring to is about mid-video when we shot it into the permagel,
Sure.
and we weren't getting expansion.
No, it just
it was penciling through.
Correct.
But, I mean, case in point, when we switched to the ordnance gel, all three of these projectiles are at 904 yards, I think. Perfect expansion. Solid penetration. I mean, I would call that 100% weight retention, essentially. Lost the tip. And an excellent, I'll say, immediate expansion and excellent permanent wound cavity at that range. So if it did that at 900, and I'll say, shoot, I wish I had, I'm going to jump ahead to a different comment in here where a person said, it's share. I don't have the person's name in front of me. Maybe I'll find it later. It said shed petals, not interested in that one because it sheds some petals. But when you look at the block, though, you need to look at where it shed those petals. And it was, this far into the block. I'm holding my hands out a couple feet or so or whatever it was. Watch the video. There's my little plug to watch or rewatch the video. And it had already expanded violently, done a ton of damage, lost the petals, actually sent them forward, creating a couple secondary wound channels. And I love Barnes bullets. I've used a handful of them. I know they work, and they've worked when I've used them. I'm also pretty equal opportunity. Like, I oftentimes shoot just what shoots best out of my rifle. That's kind of and if it has the properties, enough of the properties that I'm looking for, that I know it's going to do the job that I want it to do, right? Anyway, this isn't one that's going to pencil through, though.
No. And so in total, through ordnance grade gelatin, 22 of these bullets were pushed. At the shortest distance was 845, and then the longest distance was 904. Is that what
904 is what we ended up at that last day, yeah.
So 22 of them passed through ordnance gel in varying degrees of quality, because the more you shoot it, the worse it gets, and the worse it gets, the less reliable it becomes. 22 of them, of 22 push through, effectively showed identical behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is from Bowen 2251. Crazy idea.
Yeah.
But what if Barnes made a 375 version so you could put a 375 Ruger in a Magnum length?
Man, that'd be sick.
For a long-range dangerous game like grizzlies or buffalo. Now, here's what I'm going to say. I'll take some pokes at critters. I ain't scared. I'm probably not taking too many pokes at grizzlies or Cape buffalo.
Probably not. But you ask a great question. So I ran into one of the R&D guys at Barnes, actually at Western Hunt Expo, and we were just kind of shooting the breeze. And I said, is there any room for, bore rider style bullets with similar function windows and other calibers? And it happens that 30 is kind of a Goldilocks spot where you can end up with good mass distribution, overall length, and all those function windows that are important. Smaller than that is a little more challenging. Larger than that may be a little bit easier. It's hard to say, but it is a very niche bullet, right? So it needs to do something pretty specific. Your example of 375 Ruger is awesome because it's such a cool cartridge. It's such a cool cartridge.
It really is.
It would put, I speculate.
In fact, this particular comment, Ryan, was one that I copied and emailed down to you with a couple question marks. I'm like, oh, this seems like it could really make sense.
What I would surmise would happen is at the COL, or just the case overall length of 375 Ruger plus whatever a heavy for caliber bore rider design would, you'd actually be into a CIP length action. You'd be in a very large format.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If there was like a 375 WSM or maybe a case that was right between 375 Ruger and 300 WSM or 300 short action ultra mag or something like that, where your top, like your cartridge overall length is measured from nose to head, was a little bit more compact, I think that would be pretty rad. I think it would be really rad if you could get one in a 7 as well. I think that you could unlock some pretty, especially with the vehicle like 7 PRC, 7 WSM, 7 SOM. those three cases, I think you could do some pretty rad stuff
with a bore rider style bullet.
Yeah. I mocked up for Magnum Jones a 7 PRC, a 30-7 PRC with the 212 LRX in it. Very handsome case. I did some measuring and calculating, and it looks like you get about 1 grain of 1 grain of water capacity more in a 7 PRC Hornady case than you do in a 300 WSM Hornady case. So I think there would be an appreciable gain. It just wouldn't be huge. You could see it. It'll be there. 300 WSM, though, that's a pretty darn cool case for this one.
Like I said, it's a little bit of a perfect storm. Peter Murphy, 9854. What are the benefits of this custom round over the 300 Norma that this projectile was essentially built for?
That's a phenomenal question.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what led us to doing the build. The short answer is, depends on what you subscribe to as benefit. So if you're a person who wants the utmost in velocity and energy, it is definitely the 300 Norma. Like that's your answer. That comes at the detriment of cartridge size and case volume, and then thusly the powder that you have to dump into it. So when you get into that size of case, and even 300 PRC, which lands very nicely between the two, you are into gobs of powder. I think one of the loadings that I looked at for 300 Norma was US 869, and it was over 100 grains of powder. Now, different powder composition than 4831 shortcut, which we're running, so that's not an apples to apples comparison, but understand that the size of that case and the amount of powder required to achieve the muzzle velocity that it can before we contact pressure, and then the cost of operations of 300 Norma. So action style, we're going to a pretty special bolt face. We're going to a CIP length system. The brass in itself is fairly expensive. The powder quantities used are expensive, and they cut into how much you can shoot per pound.
Recoil,
certainly, yeah. If you're going to push a 212 grain bullet at 3,000 feet per second with 100 grains of powder, you do the recoil equation. It's significant. Really, what this was an exercise in efficiency. So what I can tell you is I won't divulge the powder throw. It was under 70 grains of powder, which is not a lot. When I was working with your WSM and the 175 LRXs, I was at 75 or 70 grains of powder. The case is rather economical and available, meaning there's an off-shelf solution to either make your own brass, go buy some quote inexpensive burn 'em up rounds, whether it's an American whitetail or any federal loading or whatever. You can't go down to your local, Cabela's and buy 300 Norma, not typically. You have that for you there, and then the efficiency of it, right? So if I'm under 70 grains of powder and I'm appreciating, 2850 for an MV on the high end, 2830, 2835 on the low end, and the top end of what I'm capable of with the 300 Norma is maybe $3,000. Notwithstanding some gun that can put up a little bit more, but that's not a huge span. 150 feet per second is not enormous. Not when you start looking at cost of operations and how much powder you're dumping into that case to get there. And then all the negative things that come with that much powder dumped into the case. On the flip side of that, I can shoot regular 300 short mag out of it. And I think that's brilliant because this is weird, right? If for whatever reason I don't have it, I lose it, I didn't get a chance to load it, there's a very high likelihood that one of the 8 loads that I shot out of this thing is going to shoot great, and I can do it. So it's an exercise in efficiency, or a discovery of efficiency and capabilities.
And versatility.
Yeah, 100%. But the 300 Norma and a 300 PRC and a 300 RUM and all those very large format 30 caliber cartridges are simply going to be able to push the bullet faster. There's no doubt about it. We can't deny that point.
I think you nailed it when you said this was an exercise in efficiency.
Yeah.
We're doing a lot with a little.
Yeah, significantly less.
Nomadic Hacker, still waiting on the 6.5 BC, Ryan.
Yes.
That one kind of keeps coming up.
It's my fault.
There was a couple of those in there.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad they're there, Mark. I'm glad you keep reminding me. You never let me know. Mark needs a suppressor. Still doesn't have one.
There were some of those comments.
Were there?
In there.
Did you? Are any of those on your list?
They didn't make the list, strangely enough. Clinker Clint, Mark needs to show off his offhand steel chicken shooting skills with the new rifle.
Tell me about it. It's bizarre. I've seen him do it more than once.
I'm worried that I wouldn't be able to perform.
I understand. I will sneak a camera onto the range.
Performance anxiety. Bad Karma, how well do the lighter WSM loads perform in the 1 and 8 twist, thinking like 175 to 200s?
Really good.
Yeah, that's cool. User-IZ7ZY7RX9T. Are there stock rifles in WSM that will fit those long-length projectiles? I guess yes, if you single feed.
Yeah, but
not
nothing with an 8 twist.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, no. Not right now. I've wondered, because on my new WSM, it's a 1 and 9. I just wonder. Oh, Neil Wilson, 8741. Did you scope yourself on the first shot? Ha, 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 ha. So that was me shooting, actually, my standard 300 WSM that we kind of set the baseline with the ELDX out of that.
Which is 2.5 pounds lighter.
The whole entire rifle is 7.5 pounds, I believe.
Yeah.
It's either 7.5 or 7 pounds, 5 ounces. I can't remember. But it's like
this as we configured it was 9 pounds 15.5 ounces,
and it had a suppressor and a brake on it.
That was everything. Yep.
No brakey on mine.
No brakey.
So
all takey, no brakey.
Yeah, and I didn't scope myself though.
No.
So rifle did move a little bit. Josh J. Spice, is the long action necessary to clear the long COAL, or just nice to have if it already fits in a short action 300 WSM chamber? I've been wanting to do this concept with my 7mm08.
So it's a good question, because technically you could single feed fire and eject it out of a short action. You could not single feed.
You would still need that twist rate though, like we were talking about before.
Yes, correct. But if you had only a short action, could you do it?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So you where you would run into a pickle is ejecting a live round, because it's so long. That depending on whose short action you're running, if it's a Tika, if you've got the short bolt stop in there, it won't clear. Which Tika actually might be the only option that comes to my mind, because technically it's not a short action.
Right.
But yeah, if you want to get out a loaded one, you need the long boy.
Pablo Garcia, 3231. What bipod system are you using? And that was the Spartan Precision Hunt Tac Pro. Did I get the order correct on that one? Just
delightful.
Just a delight.
Yep.
An absolute delight.
It's there when you want it. It's there when, or it's not when you don't.
Brilliant design. And unintentionally, Ryan, we kind of showed some of its versatility there, because I shot my rifle with it on, unplugged it from its magnetic connection, handed it to you. You plugged it into the receptacle on this one, and off we went. So Spartan Precision Hunt Tac Pro. Mike-RV4 IT. Is there really any reason to use a solid copper bullet at that long range? And I would say yes, because it shot incredibly well. It weighed 212 grains. Expanded famously at 900 yards. And did everything we wanted to do.
Yeah. And this is one of those things where, again, you can't, I can't fault brand A, B, or C of bullet design and how they work if the end result is your dead critter.
Yeah, I do want to point out, we're not saying that other things aren't going to work.
No, not at all. Where personally I arrive on this bullet as being a premier choice is how it works and what it can do, regardless of what it runs into. So what I'm talking about is if you have hard angles where you have to drive through large amounts of critter, or heavy tissue, bone, etc. A bullet like this does some wonderful things Where it's a happy coincidence is that it also happens to do it long ways away, where generally speaking, a Barnes is not the premier choice. Where their BC numbers, because they are a homogeneous design, are generally observed significantly lower than a cup and core design, and where they have a absolute defined need for retained velocity on impact to initiate expansion. This one is somewhat of Goldilocks proposition, as I've mentioned before.
K-Bob45, wish you would have shot some other bullets out there with it. 180 or 205 Burger Elite, 175 or 190 LRX, 190 ABLR, 200 ELDX, 200 grain Sierra Game King. I could really help you guys spend more money if you need help. Now, let me ask you this question.
Yo.
Those other bullets, all great bullets.
Yes.
But we would have had to seat them a little bit deeper, correct? Or no?
Yeah, because we would have had a SAMI chamber. So it's kind of an either and or situation. I mean, I think we could have gotten by. Where we goofed up is we should have shot the 200 grain ELDX.
That's what I wanted to point out.
Yeah, because one, it shot really good out of this gun. Two, you had just gotten off of a very successful hunt with it, and it would have been a really neat benchmark to put it out at 900 yards and see what it done.
Just kind of an oversight on our part. We shot it at 100 and then didn't follow up with the 900. So maybe we could do that down the road as a little addendum.
What was super significant, though, is at 900 yards, we were at full expansion at about 20 millimeters, and we had 50 inches of penetration. And we had just a giant gaping maw through the middle of that block every time we hit it. It was so cool.
I agree, that was cool.
We should have done other bullets, so.
No, maybe.
We got more Jello.
That's not an impossibility.
We got a lot of Jello.
Ryan Cloward, 7394. Can we please have an episode of Ryan just absolutely nerding out for a whole episode about the Sherman Wildcats?
Ooh, I almost did a Sherman.
The old Sherman short mags.
Yeah, those are cool too.
These are different?
Just standard Sherman Magnums. Odd 6 base cases. Don't make me build another rifle, Mark.
Got a 6 arc. This is RG-PD1RO. Got a 6 arc based on Ryan's input. Now, after the Tika episode in this video, I might end up with a 300 WSM2 fave podcast to listen to while I fix cars all day. Is that Jim's alias?
That could be.
Edward D. Abrams, 4972. And that's why after 60 plus years of hunting, reloading, and collecting hundreds of rifles, I use the 300 WSM and a Seiko for my hunting.
My man.
I just like to point out things that reinforce my biases, Ryan.
Yeah, I understand.
William B. Heron, 5452. So you know this means Muckenhirn has to use this combo on his first elk hunt.
There are plans underway, contingent on the stock company that I want to pursue making the stock for the long action 700 inlet. I've been given good intel that they will. Time will tell. I have other stocks actually that will work famously for this. So.
Oh, and then with Saberless, I agree 100% with this. So he's commenting on that comment.
Yeah.
And then
he's gonna have to shoot an elk.
Steel Eaters says agreed, although he'll probably pull some magnificent falling block straight wall cartridge to shoot. He's probably correct.
That's not untrue.
Chris Hoff, 4729. 7's the key number. I love your subtle quotes from classic movies. I think that was 7. It's from Something's About Mary. Do you know there's people in our office that haven't seen that movie?
That's ridiculous.
It's criminal. Yeah, Lupuo makes brass now. That's from Cigars 380. This is Organized Chaos. Organized Chaos.
Much of working with Mark's print materials, or for that matter, anything in his digital sphere, is that only he knows how they're organized, and it would be an impossible cipher for anybody trying to get into it to determine where is up or down. So what we don't know is, does Mark do this intentionally as a security protocol? Or
it's like a really tough password.
Yeah. Or is it just the fact that chaos lends itself to your favor. It's hard to say.
In the movies where like the person is thinking and like all the things are like floating around in equations and stuff. And then at the end, mine is like 2 + 2 = 6.
Yeah. If you ever found Mark's diary, you'd look at it and you'd be like, I can't make heads or tails of this. But there could be some like very damning or beneficial evidence in there. But you don't know what's there. Mark does. You can read it. It's like a Rosetta Stone.
It's like the commentary from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Yeah, correct. Correct. There he goes. One of God's own prototypes.
Throwing it away says, so we said this is the ultimate long-range hunting cartridge, right? Says, excuse me, we all know the ultimate is the 6.5 BC. Maybe he's right. We don't know, Ryan. We had some good leads there. This is that comment from earlier, James Wilson, 5562. I wouldn't like it shedding petals. If it does, it will pencil. I would say I see where you're coming from there. Yeah. But I would go back, watch the video, see where it lost those petals and at what velocity it lost those petals at its highest. Well, essentially, it's at the 100-yard mark.
Yeah.
And the permanent wound cavity and the weight retention and, keeping in mind it didn't lose those petals immediately. It expanded, folded back, and lost those petals and did a lot of damage along the way.
The really challenging part about that one, too, especially is in a cup and core counterpart, your bullet is also losing, we'll call them petals.
Sure.
But it's doing it at a very erratic time and place. So you don't end up with any kind of shape that's moving through except this amalgamation or blob of lead and copper that's all twisted up. And with a projectile like this, when it does fracture petals, if you lose one, you still have 3 in kind of a radial pattern, which is quite nice. If it loses all of them, you end up with a blunt instrument passing through the target, displacing material like you would not believe. And
so even at that point, it would look dramatically different than when the bullets were essentially staying intact and were penciling through the gel.
Correct.
When we had what I would say was an improper test medium.
Yeah, and for comparison, when you look at a cup and core that ends up hitting that bullet or hitting that medium and then disrupting to a random shape, that doesn't track as well through the target, right? That's to be expected, right? So if you have a big part of the jacket peel back and you retain this big long trailing bit of it, it's going to take a different course than straight through. Like if I could perfectly remove the 4 petals on the LRX bullet and just have the strike face and the shank, you stand a much better chance of that thing punching straight through than otherwise taking an erratic course. If you talk to anybody who's ever shot like a hard cast lead, like flat point bullet, or if you look at bullets like Woodley solids for shooting things like buffalo and elephant, it's preferential in the design. They want this big square face that when it hits, it just pushes a huge wake of disruption in front of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Last one.
Yo.
John Sanders -P70. Ryan may actually shoot at something further than 300 yards.
Maybe.
With 308 or 6 weirdy.
Weirdy.
I like that. I just like that one.
That's kind of funny. What I do want to do is I do want to load this in a 308 Winchester and see what its limit is. Problem I have is
you would need a 1 and 8.
Well, yes. I can concede to not obtaining gyroscopic stability with an other than 1 and 8 twist. What I really want to know is how much, just based on what we saw with this and the velocity realized, how much MV can I generate out of the 308 with just the case?
That's an interesting question.
And the projectile. And then knowing that I've got a handful of actions lying around that may be chambered in 30-06 or similar that could be turned into something, and I can get it to like a pretty respectable and appreciable velocity, like that would be kind of a demon. If it worked good enough from a velocity realized standpoint, spinning an 8 twist barrel on there would be a pretty easy thing for me to do, and just have this very strange 308 cartridge. In fact, I'm sure I've got another 308 over here. It seems like we have 308 everywhere. If that sat in there like that, oh, that would be kind of cool. Yeah, COAL, just about a 30-06, probably 3.340. Right in there. Yeah. Yeah, that'd be interesting to know. I know the guys over at Patriot Valley Arms with their Cayugas, which is a very similar bullet. They've done some very compelling research with the humble 308 Winchester loaded with their Cayugas.
What grain?
They're heavy. They're in the 2s. Like I think a 217. I could be misquoting that.
Jeez. Okay.
They've done some pretty cool stuff with 308. They're keeping 308 Winchester supersonic to like a mile, which is no small feat. And yeah,
Wow. Huh.
so I feel that it might be a fun test critter in 308 Winchester as well. That's pretty easy to do. I don't care if it doesn't spin stabilize. I just need to get it over the chronograph to see what I can get it to do.
Just get it knuckling over the chronograph.
Correct. And then I can come back to it with an 8 twist barrel and see what plays.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Well, maybe you will be doing that.
Now that would work in a Tikka.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as per usual, Ryan, we do these projects and then we are left with oftentimes additional questions.
Well, they're warranted.
Yeah. And they sometimes create new fun projects like what you're talking about right now. But man, I appreciate everybody listening, watching, commenting, tuning in, providing their questions. Lots of really good stuff there. This has been a super fun project. I don't think it's over. I think we'll do some additional stuff with it, like we're talking about, potentially whatever, other bullets or what have you, or maybe, putting this darn thing in a 3. Who knows what we'll do? I don't know.
I can tell you right now I have one underway. Like I said, waiting for stock. And then barrel's under my desk. It's ready to go.
There you have it. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, Ryan. Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Until next time, we'll catch you on the next one. If we didn't answer your question, ask away again, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
See ya.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.